Now, sports cartoons are sort of hard to sell, especially back in the 90s when the Great Saturday Morning Cartoon War, because there were a lot of competition. 5 different networks, all of them using 2 different genres, superheroes and anime. And out of nowhere, they decide to drop a sports cartoon. You think this sort of fall down and crash automatically, but no. Nascar racers stood off because they do something very basic, but they take a sort of unique twist of racing. Specifically, sort of kind of like wacky racers if they were the future, but sort of low sci-fi, but at the same time keep it compelling and true about the racing world. And you see the reason why each character stay to racing because they love it, but at the same time they have different point of views why they need to race. Each one of them sort of confirms who they actually are. None of them are one-noted characters. And that's the way you make a good cartoon. Now, this is the first time on my channel. My name is Retro. I like to talk about cartoons. And once in a month, I do a segment I like to call Forgotten Cartoons. Of course, this segment does have rules. I won't talk about cartoons only lasted 1 to 2 seasons, maybe 3. I never talk about popular cartoons on this segment, but if the cartoon sort of got forgotten, then I will talk about it. Or, rule number 3, the cartoon was super popular, but it was completely different country, 99 states, I will talk about it. And the final 4th rule, I will break my rules depends of the cartoon sort of situation, like the reason why I've gotten sort of controversy or something like that. This is the reason I will kind of break my rules. Other than that, let's get started. Now, one of the reasons why NASCAR racers survived for 2 seasons, a total of 26 episodes, is because the perfect time slot. What I mean is, back in the day of the 90s, you did not have the internet. You just hope you have the perfect time slot with no competition. And NASCAR racers was very lucky because there was so much good cartoons back then. It's sort of hard to actually choose the right one, because if you didn't, you just waste your time. It also is sort of difficult to choose one because sometimes something else is just so much better than the one you chose, and that sort of chokes you inside because you knew you could not watch that show ever again because you don't know it could have a rerun or successful one even given a season 2. So it's sort of like a dilemma back then. Now, not really. Of course, NASCAR racers have something just so crazy and bonkers that's sort of hard to ignore. One of the great examples, he has a Terminator as an enemy. Yes, season 1, all the racers had to defeat a Terminator. You have also another scene, all the racers had to take down a small army. Yes, I keep saying this show sometimes is sort of crazy, but at the same time kind of grounded. It sort of makes sense during this world, and that's super hard to pull off while suddenly being crazy, or not like Fast and Furious, the series and the cartoon, because that product just go bonkers and doesn't really explain. NASCAR racers trying to explain and make sense in this world. It also kind of make you believe this thing exists of this world without breaking the rules. That thing is hard to do. That takes talent and understanding of the rules you create. This is the reason why this show is remembered. I think what makes it different is the characters themselves make it sort of interesting. I think the first character we should talk about is probably his Flyer. The reason why they call him Flyer is because his car can actually fly for a long distance. Now, the second thing that makes it interesting, he used to be an Air Force general who has trauma, that he sort of got kicked out on the Air Force because chemical warfare make him have sort of trigger episodes of the war. But he decided to become a racer because he liked to race. But it made him interesting is the fact he's always have episodes that the war, you see his hands shaking, you see him sort of struggling to race, but he doesn't want to let it go because he loves the sports. But it making it interesting is him trying to fight off his episodes, especially her girlfriend who wants him to stop racing, to retire, but at the same time Fire can't this is a part of him, but at the same time he realized his life is more important than the race than himself. And that is sort of interesting, especially this character was never tokenizing just because you have to have a black character in a group. He is a character. The guy has a personality. He's not a kind of like a cliche military man, not a cliche a black person. He is a person with problems, and very relatable ones. Something that easily became the main lead every single time he's on the spot. Focus on him only. Now you have another good character called Stunts. Stunts sort of one trick pony that he just drives sideways. You think it would be sort of pointless and sort of boring, but no, his one trick actually is very useful in the show. You can see so many different ways using that one trick. It's something that's just sort of interesting how they pull it off, when they need to do it or not. Of course, Stunts is sort of interesting because he's sort of the generic kind of, I want to be famous, want to be rich, I want to be popular, but at the same time it's for a reason, because he had to have money to pay all his debts, specifically trying to save his father who has an illness who they don't have for cure, but he keep putting money on the sort of experiments for a cure for his father. And people sort of question why he does this. He keeps this in secret, not telling his team, but at the same time you see him sort of struggling to be the wild card. He's trying to keep proving himself. He trying to keep winning race after race because he needs to, for the money, and that itself making compelling because he's not technically greedy, he just needs the money to save his father. And once again, that's super relatable. Of course, our next character will be Spitfire. She is, you could say, the princess of the whole place, but not really. She is sort of a combination of sort of female sort of stereotypes, the princess, the tomboy, the genius, but at the same time she's there to prove herself and proves to her father that she can actually drive. But I love it, she is not the girl type. She has her own personality, her defiance to understand who she is driving this team. I think she's probably the most deepest character here because everything she says, does is actually pretty relatable and also sort of interesting. Her trick of her own car is basically boosting. I mean, it's basically very basic, but at the same time, I don't think you need that much because this character is pretty deep. Yeah, besides that, let's talk about the next character. Now, Charger, how to describe him, he has no personality, but there's so many things thrown at him. It's more interesting how he deals his sort of scenario than actually understand his personality. One of them, his sort of relationship with Spitfire, that they want to date but they can't because the job is just sort of take too much time off them. The second thing is basically his sort of rivalry with the Collector because he's always butting heads with the Collector. That's sort of interesting what they do with that. Of course, the third thing is sort of his legacy because he is third generation racer and his first and second generation are champions. But Charger, he's not. I mean, he one of those people who actually proven to be a champion like his father and his grandfather, but that sort of overwhelmed him. He actually thinks what he's supposed to do next, and that's sort of the problem with him. He doesn't know how to deal with it, but at the same time, because this series is sort of a fun action show, they really don't know what to do exactly. They sort of struggle specifically on season 2 because season 2 they're trying to develop all the characters all different ways, and Charger doesn't work that way because he's sort of a character to react to things, and I think that's one of the things that sort of struggle on season 2. In fact, many fans do not like season 2 because that's the point they sort of drag the series. If you've seen the series, watch season 2 episode 1, and that's the point you start to realize, yeah, this series are starting to fall apart a little bit. I mean, season 2 is not bad. It's like the point that you just want to get off, But at the very end, it's sort of worth watching because the main villain, what they do to the whole team. Now, it's time to talk about the main villain, Rex, who owns Nascar, who wants to destroy Team Fastech. Now, Rex, the general owner of this group, who basically is the villain. But how to describe him? He's basically a simp, more like a Lex Luthor simp who wants to take down Fastech. But how jaded, how salty, how manipulated this man is, it almost blew me away because I have never seen a character this jaded for a long time. In fact, the only character I can think of is Morocco from Inuyasha, the main villain. It's very similar, but very end, Rex beats that character because how sneaky, weaselly he really is, especially on season 2, because what he does with the good guys is super questionable and over the top. Points that you're wondering, why are you doing this for? What was the reason to manipulate, lie, blackmail, and use all the characters against each other just because the main owner of Fastech took your girl? And that's something that just blows my mind. It's just so out there, but at the same time the guy tries so hard just to screw over this team. It's just mind-blowing that actually went that far. I think that's the only reason to watch season 2. Once again, season 2 is not bad, but at the same time, as anyone who likes this series, you can tell season 2 is sort of kind of rough to watch because how repetitive, and also trying to make the main lead a charger. But I think that's the only reason why the season 2 sort of struggle. Of course, I love this show. It's also all the sort of low sci-fi they have. A lot of weird things, but at the same time so entertaining. I said at the very beginning, this series is sort of wacky racers, but in the future. But each one of them have sort of kind of low-tech technology to hit each other back and forth. It's sort of the most creative and more destructive way you can think about. And I think this series just sort of landed so well for me. Especially, I'm not interested of racing. It's one of those that kind of make you interesting because it's just sort of out there and crazy and how outrageous and fun it really is. And I think that's why it kind of lasts in my memories about this show. Of course, it has one bad thing, is sort of the CGI, because the CGI is a little outdated. I mean, when you see the first episode, you really do notice it. But it's something I do wonder, why not reboot this series? But at the same time, I can see why they do not reboot it, because it's sort of hard to capture the magic of this series. It's something I do recommend. Watch at least the first season. It's up to you. Watch the second season. But other than that, did you ever heard of Nascar Racer? You are interested or not, or you remember this series? Tell me down below. Let me know. I got really nothing else to say. Just thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and have a wonderful day. Bye.